In 1968, a decision was made in Florida that, at the time, appeared to be entirely logical. A monumental dam was constructed, engineered to impound an astonishing 21 billion gallons of water. This colossal volume was sufficient to submerge 9,000 acres of ancient woodland, to obliterate 16 miles of a vital river channel, and to drown more than 20 natural springs that had flowed uninterrupted since long before recorded history began. Florida proclaimed it progress. The engineers declared their work complete. For 57 years thereafter, the secrets hidden beneath remained unquestioned, until the water levels began their gradual descent. Every few years, often for reasons that go largely unnoticed by the public, state authorities intentionally lower the reservoir. Foot by foot, the water recedes, revealing something in the exposed mud that defies a complete explanation from engineers and remains a subject of intense scientific debate. What emerges from that reservoir floor has, in its silent revelation, fundamentally reshaped our understanding of one of the most peculiar environmental battles in American history. A conflict concerning a dam that should no longer exist, a river that should have been lost forever, and a species rapidly running out of time to find its sanctuary. To truly grasp the essence of this profound struggle, one must begin in an unforeseen place. In the year 2021, Florida witnessed the deaths of over 1,100 manatees. Their demise was not caused by boat strikes or disease. They succumbed to starvation. The invaluable seagrass beds throughout the Indian River Lagoon had catastrophically collapsed, with nearly 90% vanishing over the preceding decade, suffocated by rampant nutrient pollution and unchecked algae blooms. By the time officials formally concluded this unusual mortality event in March of 2025, the grim tally had reached 1,255 animals. Across a mere 24 months, between 2021 and 2022 alone, nearly 2,000 manatees perished. This represented more than 20% of Florida's entire manatee population, gone within a 2-year span. The government's response bordered on the surreal. State biologists initiated an emergency hand-feeding program for wild manatees, transporting romaine lettuce by the ton, simply to ensure the animals' survival through the winter months. At one feeding location alone, the initiative distributed over 390,000 pounds of lettuce in a single season. Crews stood on elevated platforms, shoveling greens into the water as manatees gathered below. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of lettuce, hand-fed to prevent a wild species from starving to death. All the while, beneath a perpetually murky reservoir in north-central Florida, more than 20 springs continued their dark, hidden flow, patiently waiting. To understand the motivations behind burying the river, one must first comprehend the grand vision Florida once held for its own future. The impoundment is known as the Rodman Reservoir, and its existence is tied directly to a proposed canal. During the 1960s, Florida embarked on an ambitious project to carve a shipping channel directly through the heart of the state. This would spare cargo vessels an additional 500 miles of sailing around the Florida Keys. Yet, this very canal would become the instrument that severed a river from the ocean it had always reached. The undertaking was named the Cross-Florida Barge Canal. The concept itself far predated anyone actively working on it. A Spanish explorer first mused about such a possibility in 1567. The state legislature formed a commission to investigate it in 1821. President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal funneled money into the endeavor during the 1930s, only for funding to dry up, leaving half-excavated trenches to be overtaken by weeds. In February of 1964, President Lyndon Johnson personally ignited the explosives at the project's groundbreaking ceremony. The elaborate plan envisioned a 184-mile waterway, complete with 5 locks, connecting the Gulf of Mexico to the Atlantic Ocean. After a century and a half of blueprints and aborted starts, Florida was finally poised to divide itself in two. Central to this colossal machinery was a behemoth known as the Crusher. This immense amphibious machine was engineered to flatten everything in the canal's path. It tore through Florida's forests as if the trees were mere paper, felling entire stands of ancient hardwood and cypress in its wake. It showed no discernment between wild forest and cultivated farmland. Generations of families, who had tilled the same land for centuries, watched as survey crews marked their property lines, only to return months later with heavy equipment, leaving the original owners with neither their cherished land nor a functional canal to justify the upheaval. The Rodman Dam was erected across the Ocklawaha River. Upon its completion, it held back 21 billion gallons of water across 9,000 acres. It submerged more than 20 natural springs and buried 16 miles of the river channel. The pristine Ocklawaha had once flowed swiftly, its waters traversing 60 miles from Moss Bluff to the St. John's River in a mere 3.5 days, a pace sufficient to keep the sandy riverbed naturally scoured and clean. Behind the dam, that same journey now extends to 23 days, a sluggish current that allows algae and invasive aquatic weeds to proliferate, choking what was once a clear, rapid river. A river whose sediments chronicled 17,000 years of natural history had been transformed into a stagnant reservoir. The canal was never intended to terminate at the Ocklawaha. Its projected course would have sliced directly into the Floridan aquifer, the indispensable source of drinking water for millions of Floridians. The U.S. Geological Survey had identified this grave risk as early as the 1930s. A project marketed as a boon to commerce was, in reality, quietly imperiling the very water supply beneath everyone's feet. It is at this juncture that the narrative transcends mere engineering. Her name was Marjorie Carr. Contemporary newspapers often depicted her as a simple homemaker from the quiet town of Micanopy, framing her story as a neat David and Goliath headline. That characterization was profoundly mistaken. Carr possessed a master's degree in zoology, had served as one of the nation's inaugural female federal wildlife technicians, and held an understanding of these vital river systems that far surpassed that of most men authorizing their destruction. Years earlier, Cornell University had denied her admission to its graduate ornithology program for a singular, discriminatory reason: her gender. Pause for a moment to consider that stark irony. The individual who would later successfully outmaneuver the formidable United States Army Corps of Engineers was once barred from a classroom because she was a woman. Carr co-founded Florida Defenders of the Environment and methodically constructed a legal argument against the canal that was patient, technically rigorous, and utterly relentless. It marked one of the first instances in American history where an individual successfully entered a federal courtroom to halt a major public works project by leveraging ecological principles rather than political maneuvering. And it succeeded. On the 15th of January, 1971, a federal court issued an injunction. 4 days later, President Nixon signed an executive order mandating the suspension of all work, famously declaring the Ocklawaha a uniquely beautiful semi-tropical stream that must be preserved. 28% of the canal had been completed, and $75 million, equivalent to approximately $600 million in today's currency, had been spent. The crusher fell silent. One final, bitter irony emerged from engineering assessments conducted after the project's cancellation. Even if completed, the canal would have been too shallow for the cargo ships of its era. The waterway that had drowned a vibrant river might never have carried a single modern vessel. However, halting the canal never led to the removal of the dam. Congress officially deauthorized the project in 1990. The abandoned corridor eventually became the Marjorie Carr Cross-Florida Greenway, encompassing over 70,000 acres of protected land and 300 miles of trails. The stark scar left by the crusher was transformed into one of the state's largest greenways. Yet, the Kirkpatrick Dam still spanned the Ocklawaha, needlessly impounding its reservoir for no justifiable purpose. It had been engineered with a design life of 50 years. A state senator named George Kirkpatrick vigorously championed the dam's continued existence. The expansive flooded pool had by then become one of the region's most popular bass fishing destinations. He prevailed. A dam that served no transportation function, constructed for a canal that no longer existed, was kept operational by a confluence of political influence and recreational interests. Today, it no longer bears the name of the canal it was built for. It bears his name. If you find yourself pondering how a dam without a purpose could stand for half a century, you are not alone. Most of Florida shares that question. The debate surrounding that dam intensified dramatically when its implications broadened beyond a single river. Manatees are inherently sensitive to cold. Below 68 degrees Fahrenheit, they begin to experience cold stress, developing skin lesions and suffering metabolic shutdown. More than half of Florida's entire manatee population now relies on the warm water discharged by power plants to survive the winter months. At the Big Bend Power Station near Tampa, the outflow attracts such a multitude of these gentle giants that the plant operates a dedicated viewing center, drawing approximately 500,000 tourists each winter. However, these power plants are aging. Over the coming decades, many are slated for retirement or will transition to cleaner energy sources. Their vital warm water discharges will cease. The manatees will require natural havens to migrate to. Florida's abundant springs represent precisely such sanctuaries. They flow at a consistent 72 degrees year-round, offering a reliability that no power plant can ever match. Silver Springs alone is fed by more than 25 individual springs, forming the largest artesian spring system in the state. A small number of manatees already manage to navigate the Buckman Lock to reach it, squeezing through metal and concrete structures never designed for them. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has formally declared that this lock is an unacceptable means of passage for the species, and some manatees have perished attempting to traverse it. Beyond manatees, the restoration of the river would reopen crucial migration corridors for species such as striped bass, American shad, channel catfish, mullet, and American eels. Fish surveys consistently document a dense concentration of these species congregating just below the Kirkpatrick Dam, pressing against an impassable barrier. This pattern strongly suggests a spawning migration abruptly halted mid-journey. Restoring the river would not merely aid one species, it would reactivate a biological superhighway that has been closed for 6 decades. Scientists estimate that if the Ocklawaha were reconnected to the St. Johns, over 500 manatees could establish Silver Springs and the Lost Springs as their permanent winter abode. The springs were available, and the animals were being counted among the dead on Florida's beaches. The only barrier between the two was a 57-year-old dam, constructed for a canal that had long since been canceled. The profound significance of a restored river merits thoughtful contemplation. The Ocklawaha stands as the largest tributary of the St. Johns River, forming part of an interconnected system that spans 217 miles from the heart of Central Florida to the Atlantic Ocean at Jacksonville. Prior to 1968, water and wildlife traversed this entire length unimpeded. The dam severed that chain at one critical point, and the entire ecosystem has borne the cost ever since. Most striped bass caught in the reservoir today are hatchery-raised, which indicates the fishery is far less self-sustaining than it might appear. A breach of merely 2,000 feet of the dam, not the entire structure, would restore more than 15,000 acres of forested wetlands, return 150 million gallons of fresh water per day to the St. Johns, and based on recent modeling, reduce the risk of algal blooms downstream by 63%. An economic study from Florida Atlantic University projected cumulative net benefits approaching $200 million over a 20-year period. However, counterarguments deserve equal consideration. During scheduled drawdowns, monitoring stations downstream have recorded significant spikes in nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients that fuel harmful algae blooms in the St. Johns River. Proponents of maintaining the dam contend that the reservoir currently functions as a nutrient trap, containing decades of accumulated pollution, and that releasing it all at once could inflict severe damage downstream. They also argue that economic projections often underestimate the true costs. The fishing aspect of the debate is equally compelling. The Rodman Reservoir effectively disperses fishing pressure across 9,000 acres, an expanse that a narrow river simply cannot replicate. The community that organizes the annual Save Rodman Open Bass Tournament, with its approximately 5,500 active supporters, represents not merely a recreational interest, but a deeply ingrained local identity. For these families, the removal of the dam does not symbolize restoration. It appears as a governmental decision made by individuals who do not reside in the area and will not personally bear the costs should the projections prove inaccurate. Advocates for restoration have worked to shape legislation to include grant programs for surrounding counties, arguing that a free-flowing river would ultimately generate more robust and self-sustaining fish populations. A former master naturalist associated with the St. Johns County program has publicly stated that the fishery would both sustain itself and improve significantly over time. While this may indeed be true, for now, it remains a projection. The evidence presented by both sides holds genuine weight. This is precisely why this complex struggle, which commenced before some of the current participants were even born, has never truly concluded. It is for this reason that the scheduled drawdown provides the closest thing anyone has to tangible proof. Every 4 or 5 years, the St. Johns River Water Management District intentionally lowers the reservoir's elevation from roughly 18 feet above sea level to approximately 11 feet. For a brief period of a few weeks, the original river channel reappears. This past winter, during the first such drawdown in 6 years, hundreds of paddlers ventured onto its re-emerged waters. What they discovered was not ruin. Along the historic river channel, Tobacco Patch Spring materialized as a vibrant turquoise column of light, rising strikingly from the brown mud, its bottom visible 15 feet below the surface. Cannon Spring surfaced on its forested bank like a shimmering blue crystal lens, with sand boiling up from the ancient aquifer precisely where it always had. Snorkelers drifted above spring vents, observing bluegill suspended motionless in the clear, upwelling waters. Wading birds, in numbers described by observers as remarkable, worked the shallows, herons, egrets, and hingas, creatures that had instantly returned the moment suitable habitat became available. A massive wooden stump, more than 17 feet long, lay across one bend of the old channel, the remains of a bald cypress that had likely stood for several centuries before the crusher arrived, its roots still firmly anchored beneath the sediment. Along Deep Creek, tiny cypress seedlings were discovered pushing vigorously through the rich, dark soil, the forest not awaiting explicit permission to reclaim its territory. Then, the gates close. The water levels rise once more. Tobacco Patch Spring vanishes back into the murk. The resilient seedlings are resubmerged. The birds depart. It appears the ecosystem does not require a century to begin its recovery. It commences the very instant the water recedes. What it truly needs is for the water to remain down. This persistent lack of resolution is certainly not due to a lack of effort. Former governors from both major political parties have expressed support for the dam's removal. A political operative so formidable that she would later serve as White House Chief of Staff brokered a comprehensive deal. Yet even her considerable influence could not finalize it. In 2025, the legislature finally approved $6.25 million to initiate the removal process. The governor promptly vetoed the allocation. In 2026, advocates returned with the Northeast Florida Rivers, Springs, and Community Investment Act, a legislative proposal requiring a formal removal plan and the reconnection of Silver Springs to the St. Johns by 2032. It passed committee unanimously, cleared the full Florida House of Representatives, and then sailed through the Senate committee. However, it ultimately failed when the legislative session concluded before a crucial Senate floor vote could be held. The dam remains. It is now 57 years old. It was originally engineered to last for 50. In 2022, inspectors formally recommended upgrading its hazard classification from low to high, a designation indicating that, should it fail, the loss of human life is probable. The inspection report identified over $1.3 million in immediate maintenance requirements. It costs more than $1 million a year simply to maintain a structure that generates no power, stores no drinking water, controls no floods, and was built for a canal declared obsolete in 1971. Removing merely 2,000 feet of it, the fraction necessary to liberate the river, would incur an estimated one-time cost of $6.25 million. Marjorie Carr once poignantly referred to the Ocklawaha as a dream lake. She passed away in 1997 at the age of 82. Decades before the dam she spent her career fighting ever came close to falling. She did not live to witness the unanimous committee votes that ultimately led nowhere, nor the gubernatorial veto that halted $6 million of already approved funding, nor the winters when biologists meticulously hand-fed 390,000 pounds of lettuce to wild animals, merely to ensure their survival until spring. She embarked on this journey armed with a master's degree in zoology and the steadfast argument that science deserved a prominent voice at the table where the fate of rivers was decided. More than half a century later, the coalition that has embraced her argument, now 60 organizations united under the banner Reunite the Rivers, continues to make that same case. As of this moment, the Kirkpatrick Dam still stands. Over 20 springs and 16 miles of river remain buried beneath 21 billion gallons of water, held back by a sand embankment dam that has outlived its own design life by 7 years. Sand, notably, ranks among the riskiest materials for this type of construction, and every 4 or 5 years, for just a few precious weeks, Florida lowers the water. The springs return. The cypress seedlings push through the mud. The river breathes once more. Then, the gates close. The story is not over, not even remotely close. If you appreciate delving into the depths of such complex narratives, consider joining our community by subscribing to the channel.